I don't really know where to start with this, but I feel like if I don't tell you soon, I'll end up convincing myself that none of this really happened. So, for anyone reading, my name is Lucas. I'm 34 years old today. I'm a data analyst, and I live in Campinas, SP. This thing happened to me last year on a random Saturday while my wife and I were having lunch at a shopping mall near our house. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. It was just a regular day, you know, and I think that's what bothers me the most to this day. The whole thing started in such a banal way that I almost didn't realize the exact moment when everything went off the rails. At that time, I was leading a normal life, as much as possible. Work, home, a 9-year-old son, Derek. My wife Carol is an English teacher, and our routine was calm, even boring at times. But everything was turned upside down because of a face, a single face that, while it seemed completely strange to me, struck me with a sense of recognition that left me paralyzed. We were having lunch at a pasta restaurant on the second floor of the mall, very close to the event plaza. I still remember the smell of sautéed garlic, the sound of cutlery hitting plates, the waiter who knocked over a bottle of wine on the table next to us. All of this was happening while I was looking at a man, at a table about 5 meters away, sitting with 2 small children and a woman with straight hair tied in a bun. He seemed completely at ease, laughing, playing with the girls, but something about his manner put me on alert. It wasn't just his face, it was the way he moved his hands as he spoke, as if he had rehearsed it 1,000 times, the way he frowned when one of his daughters asked for something, or the way he adjusted the glass to his mouth. All of this gave me a very strange feeling, a feeling of this has happened before. But the strangest thing is that while I was watching this, a name came into my head. Anthony. For no reason at all. It just came, and along with it, a sadness so deep that it made me lose my appetite right away. At the time, I told Carol I was going to the bathroom, but in reality, I wanted to walk past that guy's table. I felt like if I looked closer, I would remember something. And that's exactly what happened. As I walked by, pretending to be looking for a store at the end of the hallway, he looked up and stared at me for a second. Just a second, but it was enough. His expression changed, as if he had seen a ghost. He went pale at once, stiff. So did I, because at that moment I knew for sure, I knew that man, not by sight, not by bumping into him on the street. I knew who he was, but it didn't make any sense. The last memory I had was of him pushing me on a wooden swing, in a country house that smelled of dust and firewood. He was wearing a faded lime green t-shirt and smiling with 2 crooked teeth in the corner of his mouth. And the part that gave me the creeps the most? I must have been about 8 years old when I remembered it, but I'd never had a brother. Never. I went back to the table feeling a little dizzy, as if my body had stayed in the mall, but my head was somewhere else. Carol noticed right away that I was acting strange and asked if something had happened. I just said that I saw someone I thought I knew, but I left it at that. I tried to eat, but the spaghetti felt like paper in my mouth. And even though I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that I must be confusing the guy with someone from the past, it started to eat away at me inside, because the more I tried to ignore it, the more things came to mind, and all of them with him. Flashes, as if someone had pressed play on an old tape in my head. Me running through a field with 2 boys, a bonfire lit in the middle of a plantation, my mother telling us to go back inside because it was getting dark and Zeke didn't like being outside at night. Zeke, another name I had never heard, but that came to me so strongly that I felt sick. That's when I started to think that maybe my head was playing tricks on me. But it was also the moment I knew there was something very wrong with my story. That same night, after we put Derek to bed, I was alone in the living room using my phone, but my mind was elsewhere. I opened my old photo album, the one on the bookshelf in my room, and started flipping through it. I went through several pictures of me as a child, with my parents at family parties, trips to Ubatuba, Christmas at Grandma's house, but there was no sign of Anthony or Zeke, no one. But when I stopped at a picture of me at a picnic, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I swear to God, for a split second there was someone on the left side of the image, a boy, a figure I don't know. I blinked, and when I looked again, the image was normal, empty, but I felt like my brain had seen something that my eyes couldn't keep. I couldn't sleep well. I tossed and turned all night, feeling a strange cold on my back, like when you're being watched even though you're alone. The next day, I went to the mall again. I pretended I was going to take care of some things downtown, but the truth is that I wanted to go back to that restaurant, see if that guy would come back. And he did. Same table, same time, but this time, when he saw me, he got up and left in a hurry. He almost dragged the kids with him. That made me so anxious that without thinking, I went to the restaurant attendant and asked if that man was a regular customer. She was a little suspicious, asked why, and I made up that I thought he was a distant relative, that I had gotten confused. She said that he always went on Saturdays, but that she didn't know his name. I thanked her and left there with my head spinning. I felt like I had stumbled upon a half-open door to my own life. And now everything inside me wanted to throw that door open at once, to find out what was behind it, even with that butterflies in my stomach that only come when we feel like we're poking at something that should have stayed buried. In the days that followed, I started having lapses, moments when I would float out of nowhere. It was as if a sound, a smell, or even a word pulled me away from reality, like when you hear an old song and suddenly you're back at school. But in my case, these memories came with an absurd emotional density. I could smell the wet grass, hear a thin laugh in the distance, see the orange sky of the late afternoon, and 2 boys running in front of me. One of them called me Luquinha, and the other yelled at me not to forget to bring my flashlight. I even remember the flashlight. It was blue with a peeling Batman sticker. I would wake up sweating with my heart racing. Sometimes in the middle of a work meeting, sometimes driving, sometimes in line at the supermarket. I started writing everything down in a little notebook that I kept on my nightstand. I no longer knew what was a real memory and what was just a figment of my imagination. But there was one thing that bothered me more than anything. Why had no one ever said anything about these boys? I talked to my mother a week later on a Sunday afternoon. I went to her house, brought her cake and coffee, and waited for the right moment to ask her. I said carefully that lately I had been dreaming a lot about our childhood, and that I found it strange how empty my memory of that time was. And then I said, "Mom, did we ever live with other children, like cousins, siblings, anyone from the family?" She stopped stirring her coffee for a moment, as if she was stuck. Then she laughed, forced, and said, "Lucas, you were an only child. How could you forget that? And we barely had contact with our cousins at that time." But the way she said it, I can't explain it. It was rehearsed, as if she had memorized this answer. I stared at her, and a memory so vivid it gave me chills came back to me. Me and 2 other boys hearing voices downstairs in a strange house, peering through the gaps in a wooden staircase, and my mother talking to a man in a grey suit. He had no expression on his face. He was just listening. And when he saw us spying, he smiled. That smile was what made me wake up short of breath days later. The final straw came when my son, Derek, started talking about an invisible friend named Zeke. It was on a Thursday after school. He was drawing in his notebook, very focused, and I found the drawing a bit disturbing. 3 people in a sort of field, with the sky all red and a crooked house in the background, full of eyes in the windows. I asked him what it was, and he answered as naturally as possible. "It's the place Zeke showed me. I got goosebumps right away. I had never said that name around Derek, never, and he continued, "He says he used to live with you when you were little, but you forgot about him." I stood there, speechless, looking at him, feeling an absurd weight on my chest, as if I was on the verge of remembering something that my brain had spent years trying to hide. Derek went back to drawing, as if nothing had happened. I had to leave the room, went to the bathroom and locked myself in. I cried like a baby. I cried out of fear, confusion, anger at not understanding what was happening to my head, or to my life. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I stayed in my office, reviewing the notes I'd been making, trying to fit everything into a puzzle, but nothing fit. The memories came out of order, mixed with physical sensations I couldn't explain. The smell of something burning, the sound of a different doorbell, too high-pitched, a room with wooden walls and a round window. Then around 2 in the morning, my cell phone vibrated, an unknown number. I answered it, my heart in my throat. And on the other end, a voice I hadn't heard in, I don't know, but I recognized it right away. He just said, "Do you still like burnt marshmallows?" I was speechless. The voice continued, "It's Anthony." And then he hung up. I didn't even have time to react. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence, as if some part of me had woken up. A part that had been asleep for over 20 years. The next day, I went to work on autopilot. My body was there, but my mind seemed to be on another plane, you know. I stared at the computer screen for hours without typing anything. Just thinking about that call. I even considered it was a prank, some kind of joke, but deep down, I knew it was him. I spent the day thinking about it until around 6 in the evening, I received a message on my cell phone. It was a photo. An old wooden house with peeling paint, a rusty wire fence, and a twisted tree in front. Under the image, just a sentence. Today, 10 p.m. The number was still unidentified. I showed it to Carol, trying to sound calm, but she realized something was wrong. I made up a story that said it was an old friend who wanted to talk about an old project. She didn't buy the idea, but she didn't insist. I think she realized that this was something I needed to do, even though she didn't understand why. At 9:50 p.m., I was already in the car, driving down a dirt road that looked like something out of a bad dream. The sky was overcast, without a single star. The closer I got to the house in the photo, the more the feeling of déjà vu consumed me. Everything there seemed too familiar. The sound of gravel, the smell of wet grass, even the sound of a wind chime hanging on the porch, it was all painfully familiar. When I parked in front, there were no cars, no lights on. I stood there in the car for a few minutes, wondering if it was a trap, if I was crazy for coming here. But before I could make any decision, the door to the house creaked and opened by itself, not slowly, all at once, as if someone had pulled hard. That reminded me of something I didn't even know I had. Me running from that same house as a child in the middle of the night, feeling that something or someone was coming right behind me. I got out of the car slowly, my heart pounding in my temples, as if each step toward the porch was a test of mental endurance. The wood floor creaked in a way that seemed to echo inside my chest. When I stepped into the door, the sensation was so strange that I was momentarily short of breath. It was like crossing an invisible boundary, as if the air inside that house had a different density. It was dark inside, but I didn't exactly feel alone. It smelled of something old, of dust mixed with humidity and something else. Something that reminded me of the smell of my grandparents' room when I was a child, only with a metallic, rusty undertone. I took 3 steps and stopped. The room was exactly as it had been in the jumbled memories that had been haunting me. A moss-green sofa with a torn arm, a bookshelf full of moldy books, a Persian rug, half crooked on the floor. And there, sitting in an armchair that seemed to have been swallowed by its own dust, was he, Anthony, a little older than I remembered from my memories, unshaven, disheveled hair, but his gaze was the same. It carried that kind of silent sadness that you never learn to hide. He didn't smile. He just looked at me and said, "You took a while." My throat got tight. I didn't know whether to hug, ask questions, or scream. I stood there trying to figure out if this was really real. He gestured with his hand, indicating the chair in front of me. I sat down. We remained silent for a few seconds, as if the words were too delicate to be touched in any way. And then he said, "You remember what happened here, right?" I wanted to say no, that everything was still confusing, but in that moment, seeing that face, that place, that smell, it all came back so forcefully that it felt like the ground was giving way beneath my feet. "It was that night," he said, looking past me. "We were sleeping in that back room, you, me, and Zeke." When he said Zeke's name, something inside me tightened so deeply that I wanted to cry. I still didn't remember everything, but the pieces were coming together. "You woke up early," he continued. "You started talking about a strange light in the field, that there were men walking around in the fields." I heard that, and man, the sound of his voice telling me that matched exactly a memory I'd had weeks before, but had dismissed as a dream, a window, a blue light in the sky, a human figure descending as if on an invisible ramp. "We thought you were just impressed by those stories Grandpa used to tell. Remember, about the man who came out of the woods?" I could only nod. Every word he said was like a key turning inside a rusty door in my head. "But it wasn't a story, Lucas," he said, his voice lower now. "They came into the house." That made the air disappear from the room. The pressure in my chest was so great that I felt like I was going to faint. I couldn't move. I don't know why, but it felt like I was the only one awake. You were sleeping like a log. Zeke. He was crying, but without sound. They got you too. At that moment, he started to shake. I hid behind the closet. One of them, the bigger one with the bare face, seemed to know I was there. He didn't get me. He just looked and whispered something. I asked what. Anthony ran his hand over his face, seemingly trying to find the courage to repeat it. He said, "When the dream is over, no one will remember you." I remained silent, with an absurd urge to get up and run away from there, but at the same time I knew I needed to hear it through to the end. It was as if everything I didn't understand in my life was being explained, there in a forgotten house, with my lost brother telling me what no one ever wanted to tell me. After that, everything went downhill. Anthony told me that after that night, no one ever spoke of me or Zeke again. It was like you guys had just evaporated, and when I asked, they said I was making things up, that I was lonely, that I always was. He said he was obsessed for a while with proving he wasn't crazy. He found an old notebook with drawings of us in it, a Zeke t-shirt in the basement, and even a photo that showed our feet, just our feet cut off. But then, the drawings were gone, the t-shirt was gone, the photo was erased, literally, like it had been washed away from reality. It made me physically sick. It wasn't just a family secret. It was like someone was actively trying to erase our existence. He said, but they couldn't do it with you or with me because we remember. And that's when he told me something that made me freeze. You're having those dreams, aren't you? About the noise on the stairs, about the chair that shouldn't be in the living room, about the boy in the backyard who keeps looking at you? Yes, I was. And so was he. And the sickest part is that, without me saying anything, he described details of these dreams that matched mine exactly, like how the footsteps always sounded 7 beats, How the boy wore a dirty yellow shirt, how the chair always appeared facing you, but no one had ever moved it. "They're not dreams," he said. "They're calls, reminders, that we're starting to remember too much." That kept ringing inside my head like a broken bell. I felt invaded, violated even, as if my own thoughts were no longer just mine. I stood up, walked to the door, opened it to get a breath. The air outside seemed heavier, darker, and that's when I saw it. On the other side of the field, 3 figures standing still, motionless, tall, thin, like shadows stuck in the night, and a very soft light in the sky, pulsing slowly, like the glow of something that hadn't yet fully awakened. I closed the door immediately. I locked it with shaking hands and leaned against it, trying to figure out what the hell I had just seen. Anthony stood up quickly and asked what was wrong, but when I told him they were there, he just nodded, as if he already knew. They always come when you remember too much. We turned off all the lights in the house and went to the back, to the old storage room, where the window was small and looked out onto a thicket of bushes. We stood there in the darkness, the sound of our breathing swallowing up all the silence. Every now and then we could hear a creak of wood coming from the porch, then a creaking sound, as if someone or something was walking very, very slowly on the roof. I can't tell how long we stood like that. Time seemed distorted in there. Each second was like a rubber band pulled to its maximum, ready to snap, until the light in the sky disappeared, and with it, the sound. Anthony took a deep breath and said, "Now comes the hard part." And I, with my throat dry, asked, "Which part?" He looked at me and said, "Now they're going to try to get inside your head." I didn't understand at the time. I thought he was speaking metaphorically, but no, he was referring to that floating feeling I had been feeling, that feeling of being pulled by memories that don't make sense. They use that. They use your memories against you. They're going to try to confuse you, make you forget again, or worse, make you remember things you shouldn't. We spent the rest of the night there, and I don't know if I slept or passed out from exhaustion. I just remember waking up to the sound of my cell phone vibrating in my pocket. It was Carol. I had more than 10 missed calls. When I answered, she was in a panic. "Lucas, for the love of God, where are you? Derek says you went out last night, but that there's another you here at home, that you're not you." That hit me so hard that I almost dropped the phone. "What do you mean, Carol? I'm here. I'm me," I said, trying to stay calm. On the other end of the line, she was crying and speaking softly, as if she was afraid of being heard. "He's in Derek's room," he said. "He just wants to talk, but Derek doesn't want to leave there. He's scared." The knot that was already in my stomach turned into real anxiety. I looked at Anthony, who was standing at the door, pale. "They sent one of us." That was all he said. We got in the car and flew back home. The road seemed endless. Every passing light made my heart beat faster, as if at any moment something would appear in the middle of the road. And with every kilometer, the same question kept hammering. If there's another me back home, then what am I? We arrived home at almost 6 in the morning. Daylight was beginning to break on the horizon, but the house was still shrouded in a thick shadow that seemed more emotional than physical. Anthony stayed in the car, ready to intervene if necessary. I walked in slowly, cell phone still in hand, and called Carol. She came out of the kitchen, her eyes puffy, and pointed down the hallway. "He's still in there." I walked to Derek's room, and before opening the door, took a deep breath. When I walked in, I saw myself sitting on the edge of the bed. Literally, same clothes I'd worn 2 days ago, same shoes, even the same little scar on my eyebrow, but there was something wrong. The way he looked at me, as if he was trying to imitate my gaze but just missing the mark, a staged version of myself. And when he spoke, my spine froze. "I thought you'd take longer. We need to talk about what you're doing. You're remembering too much." I froze. Seeing someone, with my face, sitting on my son's bed, talking to me as if I were the intruder, was one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. My first impulse was to go after him, but something in his eyes made me freeze. It wasn't fear. It was a kind of compassion, as if he was sad for me. "You don't understand, Lucas. Every time someone pulls too hard on their memory, reality starts to unravel, and if it unravels enough, he wakes up." "Who him?" I asked, my voice cracking. "The sleep machine. The one who dreams all this up. If she wakes up, the dream ends, and no one here will exist anymore." He said this as if he were explaining it to a student who had cheated on a test, patiently, but with a hint of threat. And then he pointed at Derek. "You're making him remember too. This can't go on." At that moment, Carol appeared in the doorway with Anthony right behind her. The other me stood up slowly, as if not wanting to cause alarm. "You're going to have to choose. Either you forget about it for good, or you're going to be taken back." And then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He turned to Derek and said in the softest voice in the world, "Remember when we used to kick the giant mushrooms back at the plantation?" Derek's eyes widened. He remembered. He knew. Without thinking twice, I ran to him and hugged him tightly, protecting him with my body. Anthony stood in front of the door, but it wasn't necessary. The other me just sighed, as if accepting defeat. "You chose." And then he simply disappeared. Literally, as if he had been erased with an invisible eraser. The room went silent. Not even a breath could be heard. Until Derek looked at me and said, "I think he was sad, Dad. I think he didn't want to be him." It was the most painfully real thing I heard that day. After that, we decided we needed to get away. We moved the following month. Anthony stayed with us for a while, then disappeared again. I don't know if it was his choice or if someone made him disappear. Carol is still trying to make sense of everything that happened, but she prefers not to talk about it much. Derek has changed too. He doesn't draw those weird landscapes anymore, and he rarely talks about his friend Zeke. Sometimes, when he's quieter, he mumbles things to himself as if he's trying to keep some memory alive. But I never interrupt him. I also stopped writing in the notebook. I burned it, actually. It was on a Sunday morning, without ceremony. As if I was consigning that chapter of my life to oblivion, or at least trying to. Even today, I sometimes go into a float state. It happens when I least expect it. In traffic, in the shower, when I'm staring into space. I always get that same feeling. That something is watching me from the inside. That someone is paying attention to what I'm thinking. At those times, I repeat a mantra. Crazy and childish, but it keeps me grounded. The machine is sleeping. The machine is sleeping. The machine is sleeping. I know that many people will think that this is all made up delirium, a side effect of some unresolved trauma. That's okay. I'd rather believe that too. But I've learned one thing. Sometimes remembering is more dangerous than forgetting. And if one day you feel that there's something in your life that doesn't fit, a strange void in your childhood memories, don't pull on that thread. Because there are things that are only quiet because we stopped looking at them.